There's something about camping in the Appalachians that feels off. Maybe it's the way the fog moves between the trees, or how the night never seems fully silent. In this video, I'll share 9 of the most disturbing true Appalachian camping horror stories, tales that were never meant to leave the woods. If you enjoy eerie, true encounters that crawl under your skin, give this video a like. It helps us reach more horror fans like you. Comment below where you're watching from. Every viewer is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family's tuning in from tonight. And after you hear all 9, let me know which story creeped you out the most. And don't forget, subscribing gives huge support to this channel and helps us keep bringing you more terrifying stories from the shadows. Now, let's begin. We set up camp just north of Boone, North Carolina, on a patch of mossy ground half swallowed by the forest. The fire tower ruins were maybe 100 yards uphill, slouched and skeletal, just barely visible through the trees if the moonlight caught right. My friend Carter had insisted this would be a low-key spot, somewhere quiet and isolated, perfect for a weekend away from the grind. No phones, no noise, just us, some freeze-dried meals and 2 borrowed tents. The air was thick even at dusk, dense with the smell of rotting leaves and damp pine. Fog hung low, curling around tree trunks like it was watching. The kind of fog that doesn't move much when you walk through it, just lingers. The ground was soft underfoot, and every step felt like pressing into something buried. The fire tower itself was more rust than wood, its skeletal frame leaning like it had given up halfway through a collapse. Carter climbed partway up for a better view, but I stayed down looking over the site. One corner of the clearing had half-buried stone blocks, maybe from an old cabin foundation. There was a rusted hook in one, like something used to be tied down there. That night, the forest felt quieter than it should have been, even with the campfire crackling and Carter muttering about how many squirrels he could hear earlier. Something about the silence under it all felt intentional, like everything out there was holding its breath. We zipped into our tents by midnight. The fire had burned low, just a soft orange glow. I remember listening to the forest, trying to sleep, when I realized something strange. I couldn't hear insects, no crickets, no distant owl, just wind through the trees, except even that was slow, slower than it should have been. Around 3 a.m. I woke up, no idea why. The inside of my tent was cold and damp. I lay there for a minute, adjusting to the quiet, when I noticed a glow through the fabric, faint, yellowish and moving. I thought it might be Carter up for a piss, but the light wasn't coming from the direction of his tent. It was moving, slowly through the woods, deliberate, too steady to be a flashlight. No flicker of a beam, just a soft glow, like a lantern. I sat up, squinting toward the outline of the trees. The light circled once, disappearing behind a trunk, then reappeared from the other side, closer this time, maybe 10 feet away. I pressed my face against the tent fabric, but saw no figure, no footfalls, no shadow, just light. And then it stopped, hung there, still. I unzipped the tent slowly. Cold air rushed in, wet, earthy, sharp with the smell of iron. The lantern light was gone, but directly above the tent, maybe 7 feet up, a rusted metal lantern hung from a tree branch, swaying gently like someone had just let go. The light, inside it burned steady. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in my tent, flashlight off, watching that old lantern sway. No wind, no sound. Just the slow pendulum of rusted metal and flickering flame. By sunrise, the light inside the lantern had gone out. I climbed out quietly. Carter was still asleep in his tent, breathing heavy. I walked to the tree where the lantern hung and stood under it. It was old, really old. Thick with corrosion, cracked glass panels and a bent handle wrapped around the branch like a twist of bone. No ladder, no footprints, no way someone could have reached up there without a step stool or gear. And yet, there it was. I called out for Carter to wake up. He grumbled something but eventually unzipped his tent, blinking like a drunk. I asked him if he'd seen anything last night. He hadn't. Just dreamed of water. Said he woke up feeling like his hands were wet. When I pointed out the lantern, he laughed at first, said it was probably there before and we just hadn't noticed. But I'd walked that exact spot when we'd set up. It wasn't there. We decided to break camp early. Neither of us said it out loud, but something had shifted. The air felt wrong. The silence had teeth. As we packed, I noticed something else. Muddy prints near my tent. Just one set, barefoot, too wide for mine. The toes dug deep, like whoever left them had stood there for a while. They trailed off into the woods and vanished. We didn't follow them. As we hiked back toward the car, the trail felt longer than I remembered. Trees looked closer together. The fog didn't burn off with the sun. I kept glancing behind us, expecting to see that yellow glow bobbing through the trees. Back in Boone, we didn't talk much. I dropped Carter at his place and drove home. Windows down, trying to shake the damp smell from my clothes, but I couldn't stop thinking about that lantern. A week later, I went back alone, just to see. I followed the same trail. The fire tower ruins were still there, but the clearing looked smaller, overgrown, like no one had been there in years. No signs of our camp, no fire pit, no footprints, nothing, except the hook. That old stone block with the rusted hook was still there, but this time, there were two more blocks beside it, like corners of a foundation. One had a name scratched faintly into the stone. My name, weather-worn, almost gone. I left without looking back. Haven't spoken to Carter since. Last I heard, he moved west. But sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment and the windows are open, I swear I hear it. The faint clink of rusted metal, swaying just outside the glass. I don't check. I don't look. I don't go camping anymore. I'm not much of a camper. I grew up in Charlotte, strip malls, concrete AC. But my girlfriend Emma grew up different. She was born in Morgantown and spent most summers running barefoot through woods and sleeping under canvas. So when she suggested a quiet weekend up in the Appalachians off Route 219, I agreed, mostly to make her happy. We pulled into the ranger station just before dusk. Fog sat low on the hills like it had nowhere else to go, clinging to the road in lazy curls. A man in his 50s, maybe older, came out from a side building. He wore the green and brown of the Forest Service, hat in hand, and his mouth tightened when Emma mentioned Site 14. 14? He repeated. You sure? She unfolded an old trail map she'd downloaded from some backpacking forum. Sure. Enough, the little square was marked in faded red ink. Site 14, Ridge Loop. Ma'am, he said slowly. That site's been closed for years. Shouldn't even be on the map anymore. Why? Emma asked. The ranger scratched the back of his neck. Flooding. Mudslides. I don't know, just marked as restricted. You're better off sticking to Site 9 or 11. They're closer to the main road. But Emma was already folding up the map. We'll just check it out. If it looks sketchy, we'll move. He didn't argue. Just handed us a small key for the pit toilet padlock and wished us well, in a voice that sounded more like, be careful. We drove another half hour down a narrowing trail road. No signage, just faded tire, tracks and the occasional nailed tin marker with peeling numbers. Site 14 wasn't marked by a post like the others, just a mossy clearing off the bend, a fire ring made of scattered rock, and a warped wooden table half sunk into the dirt. But it felt private. No tire marks, no footprints, just the smell of damp pine needles and the hum of crickets. We pitched the tent, made a small fire, ate canned soup in silence as dusk turned the trees to shadows. I remember thinking it was too quiet. No other campers nearby. Just the far-off howl of something, maybe a fox, echoing in the hollow. It was around 1 a.m. when I first heard the voices, not loud, not screaming, just present. Murmurs, like a conversation coming from the tree line. I sat up. Emma stirred beside me, her back rising and falling with slow sleep. I thought maybe it was a radio, another camper a few hundred yards off. Then I heard laughter, 2 people, one male, One female, then more, overlapping voices impossible to pin down. I held my breath. There was no wind, no footsteps, just the voices shifting from laughter to something else. Someone arguing, then crying. A woman maybe, sharp, wet-sounding. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The fire had burned low, orange coals pulsing. The woods beyond it were black. Nothing moved. No lights, no shadows, just noise. I closed the flap again and lay awake the rest of the night. By morning, it was gone. The sound, the tension. Everything felt normal again, except the fire ring had been disturbed. Stones shifted. Some ash kicked out like something had been stepped in. Probably a raccoon, Emma said when I pointed it out, but she didn't sound convinced. We packed up quickly. The ranger station looked the same, but when we stepped inside, a different man was at the desk. Younger, maybe early 30s. "Morning," he said with a nod. "Just checking out?" I said yes, then hesitated. "Can I ask about Site 14? His face changed. Not surprise exactly, but something like discomfort. He opened a drawer and pulled out a laminated, updated version of the site map. "There's no Site 14, he said, tapping the page. "That loop was restructured in 2011 after a few washouts. We removed a couple of sites. 14 doesn't exist anymore." Emma pulled out her phone and showed him the old PDF. "That version's very outdated," he said. "We had an incident up there in 2009. Fatality. Hiker got caught in a storm, trees came down. Family filed a complaint, site was shut down, permanently." "What kind of fatality?" I asked. The ranger didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Multiple injuries. Some trauma. Nobody talks about it much." He didn't offer more. We left after that, driving back toward town in silence. That night, at a cheap motel near Marlinton, I couldn't sleep. Emma was quiet too, scrolling through her phone looking for old articles. Nothing, just vague blog posts. A forum thread deleted. Mentions of weird sounds and closed loops. We didn't talk about it until the next morning. "There were voices," I finally said. "You heard them too, didn't you?" Emma nodded without looking up. "I thought it was a dream." We drove home. But that night, I had another dream, if you want to call it that. I was back at Site 14, sitting by the fire. Everything was frozen in place, in the trees, the smoke, the fog, like a paused photograph. I turned my head, and beside me were 3 people, a man, a woman, and a kid, sitting around the fire like they belonged there, but none of them had faces, just blank, smooth skin. And yet I knew they were watching me. I woke up choking on air, my shirt soaked through. Over the next few weeks, things started to slip. I'd hear water dripping when the sink was dry. I'd see fog clinging outside the window even on clear days. I started having trouble remembering details, names, addresses, even what I'd said 10 minutes ago. Emma noticed too. She stopped bringing up the trip, stopped mentioning Site 14. When I asked, she said, "I just want to forget it. Can we please forget it?" But I can't. A few months ago, I went back alone. I know that was a mistake. The trailhead was still there, but the road was gone, washed out, overgrown. No markers, no signs, like nothing had ever been built there. But I followed the direction as best I could, walking by memory. After 2 hours of searching, I found it. The fire ring was there. So was the half-rotted picnic table, and sitting on the table was a folded paper map. The same outdated one Emma had printed from that old site. Same faded red square marked Site 14. Same route we took, but someone had written across it in smeared black ink, "You never left." I still have that map. I keep it locked in a drawer. I haven't heard from Emma in months. She moved out. No note. Just gone. And sometimes when it's late and the house is quiet, I hear that same laughter, layered with sobbing, coming from just outside my window. It never stops. Not completely. I'm not the kind of person who usually does things alone. I think that's part of why I went. After the divorce, the house was too quiet. Friends meant well, but I could feel the shift. The way people stop inviting you to things once you don't come as a pair. So I started looking at maps, trails, disconnected spaces. Cherokee National Forest kept showing up on solo camping blogs, especially the less traffic sections near the Tennessee-North Carolina line. I packed light. One-person tent, basic cook kit, a weather-worn notebook I hadn't touched in years. It wasn't about survival or proving something. I just wanted to disappear for a few days in the trees. No cell towers, no traffic hum, no awkward conversations about how I was holding up. By the time I parked off a service road near Tellico Plains and hiked a few miles in, the late afternoon light had turned gold, thick and drowsy between the trees. The trail narrowed quickly, barely marked, winding past wet rocks and overgrown switchbacks. Birds were still chirping, but faintly, like they were just going through the motions. I found a small flat stretch just above a slow-moving creek. It smelled like moss and cold water and damp leaves. The air was heavy, like it had rained somewhere nearby. My boots sank slightly in the soft earth as I pitched the tent. No sounds of people, no distant engine noise. Just wind and the occasional rustle of something bigger than a squirrel moving through the brush, too far to see but close enough to keep you alert. By sundown, I'd made tea, scribbled a few lines in the notebook, and crawled into the tent. The forest settled in around me, quiet still, almost too still. Sometime around 2 a.m. I woke up. It wasn't a sound that got me up. Not exactly. More like the absence of everything else. No wind, no creek sounds. Just a weird, pressing silence. Then, it started. A long, dry scraping noise, like something dragging a stick across fabric. Slow, hesitant, right outside the tent wall. I held my breath. The sound crept from one corner to another, circling. A sharp scrape. Pause. Then another. Slower this time. It wasn't constant. It would stop for minutes, then start again, always shifting. Always near, but never centered. I fumbled for the flashlight and flicked it on. Silence. I waited. Listened. After a few minutes, I turned it off. Not 10 seconds later, the noise came back. A slow scratch. Then what sounded like pressure. Like tiny fingers pressing on the canvas from the outside, then sliding, then still. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I unzipped the tent flap and stepped out into pale, washed-out fog. The air was cold and wet. My boots squelched into soft mud, but I didn't care. I just needed to see it. I needed confirmation that something had actually been there. The ground around the tent was untouched. No animal tracks, no boot prints, nothing. But the tent itself, it was covered in handprints. Dozens of them. Faint, greasy smudges in every direction. Some streaked downward like something had slipped or dragged its palm. Others were perfectly planted. Small, round, distorted fingers splayed out too wide. Some pressed right up against the mesh windows like something had been looking in. A few were on the roof of the tent. I still can't figure that part out. They were all the same size and childlike, but wrong. The palms were too narrow, the fingers uneven, longer than they should be. And the shape, the way they curved or pulled like the fingers didn't move right, and no footprints. Not even one. I backed away, heart hammering, and looked around. Nothing. Just fog. The trees stared back blankly, unmoved. I packed up in under 10 minutes. Tent crammed into its bag, gear shoved haphazardly into my pack. My hands were shaking and I dropped the lighter twice, trying to shove it in my coat. I didn't eat, didn't drink, just hiked. Hours passed before I saw another soul, an older man in a pickup parked where the forest road met gravel. He looked like a local, worn flannel, narrow eyes. He raised a hand when I came out of the tree line and gave a small nod. "You come out of Ridge Hollow?" he asked. I didn't answer at first. My throat was dry. "Did you hear?" Anything? I asked. He studied me for a second, then leaned against the truck. That place ain't marked for a reason, he said. Used to be part of a kid's camp up there. Long gone now. Nobody goes that far anymore. Why? I asked, and immediately regretted it. The man scratched the back of his neck and looked away toward the tree line. Some places remember things, he said, even when people don't. He didn't say anything else, just got in his truck and drove off. I told myself it was kids messing around. Maybe someone living out there, off-grid. But there were no tracks, no campfire smoke, no food wrappers, or noise, just those prints and the silence. Even now I can't stand silence. I sleep with a box fan on and the TV volume low. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of fabric being touched, not torn or slashed, just pressed on, like small hands sliding slowly over the duvet. A month after I got back, I took the tent to the dump, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. I left it folded in a plastic tub on the porch for weeks, afraid that if I opened it, I'd find those prints still there, still damp, still fresh. I've tried looking up Ridge Hollow, the trail I used, anything about the camp he mentioned, but the forest doesn't keep records the way people do. Trails change, trees fall, and some places just vanish. There's one photo I took, a blurry shot from the first afternoon. You can barely make out the tent through the trees, but if you zoom in just enough, there's something strange in the background, a shape behind the mesh. Too tall for a child, but narrow like a shadow caught leaning in. It's probably nothing, but I deleted it anyway, just in case. I've done a lot of backcountry trips in my life. Grew up outside of Asheville, spent most weekends somewhere in the Pisgah, knees in the mud, fire smoke in my clothes. It's not glamorous, it's wet, quiet, lonely, but that's part of why I go. I've always felt more myself out there than I do in town. This trip was just supposed to be a reset. Me and Caleb, an old friend from high school I hadn't seen in a while. We both needed to get away. He'd just gotten laid off. I'd just ended a long, messy breakup. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were both running from something. We hiked a few miles and off a spur trail near Courthouse Falls, not a popular spot this time of year. It had rained a day or two before, and the forest still held that soaked earth smell. Everything was spongy underfoot. Ferns drooped with water. Our boots made that sucking noise with every step. We set up camp near a bend in the creek. Just 2 tents, a ring of stones, and a tarp strung between trees for cooking. No other hikers, no voices. Just the woods. You could hear things shifting at night. Limbs creaking, a distant splash, maybe a deer moving through thick brush. That kind of quiet only happens far from people. The kind that presses in on your ears until even your own breathing sounds too loud. The second evening, we realized we were low on kindling. The main logs we'd gathered were damp and smoked too much, so Caleb grabbed the hatchet and went off to split some of the drier deadfall we'd seen closer to the ridge. He was only gone maybe 15 minutes. When he came back, he looked off, pale, tight around the mouth like he was trying not to show something. He dropped a piece of split wood at my feet. It was about the length of my forearm. The outer bark looked normal, pale, weathered, but the center, the grain was wet, and something dark oozed from the middle, slow and thick, like molasses. I leaned in. It wasn't sap. It smelled off, metallic, sharp, like blood and iron. "You find this in a log?" I asked. He nodded, then added, "Split it clean. Axe didn't even catch." I looked again. The wood wasn't rotten, it was solid, dry on the outside. Just this single line of black-red liquid leaking from the heartwood. "We should see where it came from," I said, standing up. Caleb hesitated, but eventually led the way. We climbed back toward the ridge, following his boot prints in the soft ground. A few splinters of bark marked the spot where he'd paused, but where there should have been a downed tree or stump, there was nothing. Just churned up soil, damp leaves. A small depression like something heavy had been there recently and was now gone. "You sure this is it?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just looked around, arms crossed like he was cold. "I split it right here," he said. "Right here." There was no hole, no burn mark, no dragging trail, no roots, no trunk, just dirt and the weight of something missing. We walked back to camp without talking much. That night, the forest felt heavier. No wind, no bugs. The fire burned low and the smoke clung to everything like wet cloth. I kept checking the shadows just beyond the tarp line, not because I heard anything, but because I didn't. Around midnight, I zipped up my tent and tried to sleep. But something about that piece of wood, the way it bled, wouldn't leave my head. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up to the smell. Not smoke. Not the usual wet forest musk. This was sharper, metallic, sour, like something rotting in a tin can. I unzipped the tent and poked my head out. The fire was nothing but a few glowing coals. Caleb was already up, crouched near the edge of the tarp with the flashlight in his hand. His eyes were wide, scanning the trees. "You smell that?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Thought it was you." We checked the food bags, still tied high, untouched. No sign of raccoons or bears. The creek was still running. Everything looked normal, but it felt wrong, like the woods were waiting. Back at the fire pit, that split log was still sitting off to the side, except it wasn't bleeding anymore. The black-red stuff had crusted into the grain, hardened like scabbed-over skin. "I'm tossing it," Caleb said, reaching for it. I stopped him. "Don't. I'm not keeping it." "It's not about keeping it," I said, quieter now. "Just leave it." He hesitated, then stepped back. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the fog was thick enough to feel. Wet strands clung to our arms as we packed up. Everything we touched felt soft with moisture, even the rocks. The forest had this strange dullness, like it didn't want us anymore. We hiked out in silence, retracing our steps. But even that didn't feel right. Trees that had been familiar now looked different. The trail seemed longer. The creek didn't cross where I remembered it. At one point, we stopped to rest. I turned and asked Caleb if he remembered a particular log bridge we'd crossed on day one. He shook his head. "No, we came up the other side." But I knew we hadn't. By the time we reached the service road, we were both soaked in sweat and fog. The truck was still there, waiting like nothing had happened. I didn't talk to Caleb for a while after that trip. Not because we fought, just because neither of us had the words. About a month later, he mailed me something. A small padded envelope. Inside was a Ziploc bag with a chunk of that wood, just an inch or two. A note scribbled on lined paper. "Tell me this looks normal to you." I didn't open the bag. I threw the whole thing in the trash and took it out that night. I don't camp much anymore. When I do, it's car camping. Well-lit trails, ranger stations within walking distance. But I still think about it. That piece of wood bleeding like an animal. The missing tree. The way the forest just rearranged itself. And sometimes late at night, I catch that same smell again. Just for a second. That metallic rot, sharp enough to sting your nose. It always disappears, but not before I remember what it felt like out there. The weight of something watching just beyond the fog. I don't know what Caleb saw before he split that log. I never asked. And he's never offered. Some things we just leave buried. It was supposed to be a quiet reset. Just me, a campfire, and a few nights off-grid. No reception, no work emails, no forced small talk. I'd been grinding hard at my job in Asheville, software work mostly, and burnout was showing in the cracks. Sleepless nights, jaw tension, zoning out during meetings. I needed space. I picked a trail loop deep in the Appalachian backcountry west of Brevard. Not a marked campsite. Just a bend along an unmaintained side trail, where the land flattened out beside an old dry creek bed. The map called it Dunlow, Hollow. No nearby towns unless you counted the ghost town remnants of Candler's Fork, half a dozen moss-covered chimney stacks, and an overgrown church no one used anymore. I got in around early evening. Fog was already creeping low across the holler, dragging mist through the treetops like slow fingers. Everything smelled wet, not fresh, but old. Damp earth, rotting bark, mildew. I set up my tent, gathered some dry kindling, and built a small fire before the light disappeared. The forest closed in fast at night out there. I sat with a can of beans balanced on my knee, listening to the fire crack and the insects chirp. The fog thickened, curling just beyond the firelight. It felt like the trees were pressing in. Close, enough to feel without touching. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Soft, close, but coming from the dark woods behind me. Male voice, slow and careful. 32, 33. I froze. The fire popped behind me. The whispering continued. 34, 35. It wasn't frantic or hurried. No rustling of leaves, no footsteps. Just counting, deliberate, steady, and close enough that I didn't want to turn around. I sat there for several minutes trying to rationalize it. Another camper? A prank? Some weird echo from the hills? But no one else was out here. I'd passed the last marked trailhead hours earlier, and the way the voice clung to the air, like it belonged inside the mist, made my skin crawl. 41, 42. I finally stood. The fire hissed slightly as I kicked some dirt on the edge. The whispering stopped for half a beat, then resumed. 43. I turned with the flashlight. Nothing. Just fog. Tree trunks stretching upward. Like ribs, the forest had gone still. Even the insects were quiet now. 47, when I called out, "Hey!" and instantly hated how small my voice sounded in that stillness. Then, nothing. Silence. A full, complete stop at 49. I held my breath, waited for 50, but it never came. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed by the fire with the light on, every sound amplified. Twigs snapping, distant creaks, the occasional patter of water dripping from the canopy. At some point before dawn, I noticed the rocks around the fire pit, a perfect circle of pebbles. Not big stones, just small, rounded creek rocks, 49 of them. I counted 3 times. I hadn't made that circle. I hadn't touched any rocks. I left the site just after sunrise. No breakfast, no journal entry. Just a fast, uneven breakdown of the tent, hands shaking with every knot I tried to undo. I kept glancing back at the ring of pebbles, half expecting them to shift. But they didn't. Just sat there in that too perfect circle, like they'd always been there, like I'd missed them somehow until that moment. The hike out was longer than it should have been. I couldn't focus. The trail felt different. In the morning light, tighter, less familiar. Trees that had seemed harmless yesterday now looked twisted and hunched. At one point, I passed a patch of moss with a bare spot in the center, just a small circle of raw dirt about the size of a fire pit. I almost stopped, but something in my chest clenched. I kept walking. Back in Asheville, I tried to brush it off, told myself I'd been tired, imagining things. Auditory hallucinations aren't unheard of in isolation. That's what I Googled anyway. But a week later, I found something in the side pocket of my pack. A pebble. Same kind. Smooth, pale, damp feeling even though it was dry. I checked every zipper, every corner. I hadn't packed any rocks. I know that sounds dumb, and who accidentally packs a pebble? But I hadn't touched any. I threw it in the trash, then took the trash outside just in case. That night I heard whispering again. Not clear this time, just a breathy rhythm, barely audible. I turned on every light in the apartment, slept on the couch with the TV on. It kept happening. Not every night, but sometimes, around 2 a.m., I'd wake up and just feel it, that presence, like something was nearby, counting in its head. I'd check the window, or the closet, or the foot of the bed. Nothing. But I never felt alone. I started marking the nights it happened. 49 nights over the course of the next 6 months, not all in a row. But by the end, the pattern was clear. I don't know what it means. I went back once, and 2 months after it started, told myself I was imagining things. I needed to see it in daylight. I hiked in with a friend, told him it was just a weekend getaway. I didn't tell him about the counting or the rocks. But when we reached the spot, Dunlow Hollow, it was gone. No clearing, no fire pit, just thick undergrowth and downed trees. The creek had rerouted slightly, washing away part of the old trail. I checked my GPS 3 times. We were standing exactly where I'd camped. But the space was different. My friend didn't think much of it. Figured I misremembered. I haven't talked to him in a while either. There's something I didn't mention yet, something I still haven't explained away. That last night, the 49th, I woke up with dirt under my fingernails. Not a lot, just enough to notice like I'd dug something or buried something. I keep the light on now, and I don't go camping anymore. We weren't supposed to go that far, just a short night hike. That was the idea. Nothing reckless. Just me, Ben, and Raffi, stretching our legs after 2 long days of sitting around the fire at Little Fork Campground. The main trails were closed for seasonal maintenance, but we'd found an unmarked path veering off into the woods. Looked like an old service road. Overgrown but walkable. It felt like something only locals would know about. We left around 9 p.m. The air had that dense, cold feel that clung to your skin. Mist rolled low across the tree roots, and every few steps, the ground sank just enough to remind you how far you were from pavement. Ben joked that we'd find an old moonshiner's shack. Raffi laughed, but I noticed he stuck close to the middle. We didn't bring much, just small flashlights, a thermos of coffee, and one walkie clipped to my pack in case we got turned around. The woods in the Appalachians don't feel like other woods. They don't breathe the same. It's not just the trees. It's the way sound carries, like everything's muffled under wet wool. The trail was a mix of crumbling gravel and exposed roots, weaving through a hollow with tall white pines lining either side like pillars. We were maybe 1.5 miles in when we saw it, eyeshine, just ahead between 2 trees about the size of a softball. We froze, instinctively lowering our voices. "Deer?" Raffi whispered. Ben squinted. "Probably," but I was already uneasy. The glow wasn't the yellow-white flicker you get from deer. It was colder, a blue-green shimmer, steady, and higher than it should have been. Way too high. "Tree branch?" I offered. We walked a little closer, but the light didn't blink or shift, just stared back, still, fixed. That's when Ben slowly swept his flashlight in a wide arc, and we saw the others, another pair, then another, spaced out evenly like reflectors, surrounding us in a wide, silent circle just beyond the edge of our light. At least 6 pairs, maybe more, always between trees, never overlapping, all watching. No breath, no twitch of an ear, just there. Raffi muttered, "They're too high up." We didn't say anything after that. We turned, slow, quiet, and walked back the way we came. No running, no talking, just deliberate steps and shallow breaths. I didn't look behind me. I didn't want to see if the lights moved. By the time we saw the distant orange glow of our fire pit, I felt like something had uncoiled from around my chest. But none of us sat down. We just stood there, flashlights off, barely speaking. I remember checking the time, 11:14 p.m. We hadn't talked about what we saw, not that night, not the next day. Raffi left early the following morning. Ben said he had work stuff and packed up soon after. I stayed one more night. I wish I hadn't. After they left, I told myself I'd finish the trip, prove it was nothing. I even tried retracing the trail in the daylight. It was harder to follow than I remembered. The overgrowth was worse. I never made it back to the same spot. But that night I felt it again. I was sitting by the fire alone, no music, no coffee, just the crackle and pop of wet logs, when I noticed the silence. No wind, no insects, just a thick, pressing stillness. And then, just outside the light, I saw it again, 2 points of pale green reflection watching from the tree line. I didn't grab a flashlight this time, I just sat there. Another pair flickered onto the left, then another. They weren't moving, weren't stepping forward or swaying, just forming that same wide circle. And then I realized something that's stuck with me since. The fire wasn't flickering in their eyes. No shimmer, no heat wave distortion, just flat reflection, like they were behind glass. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't pack. I just waited for the sun to come up. When it did, I walked the edge of the campsite looking for prints. Nothing. No animal tracks, no broken twigs or disturbed soil. But under one tree, the exact spot where I'd seen the first eyeshine, there was something else. A knot of twine. Old, frayed, nailed into the tree about 8 feet high, like someone had tied something there long ago and let it rot in the weather. I took a photo, still have it somewhere on my phone. It doesn't look like much and just string and bark, but in person, it looked deliberate, placed. On my way out, I stopped at the ranger station, told them there might be a loose animal wandering near the trail. I didn't say what we saw. The ranger was polite but distracted. When I mentioned the old path by the white pines, he paused. "That section hasn't been maintained in years," he said. "No one's supposed to be hiking up there." I asked why. He glanced toward the back window where the ridgeline sat hunched in fog. "Local thing," he said. "Some folks say it's where one of the search parties went missing back in the 70s. Don't know if it's true, but it's not marked for a reason." He said it like he didn't want to believe it either. I didn't press, just nodded, thanked him, and left. That was almost a year ago. I've tried to forget it, but it won't leave me. Not completely. I still camp, but not in the mountains. Not near pines, and never at night without floodlights and noise. I sleep lightly now, always with my back to something solid. Ben and I haven't really kept in touch. I texted him once just to ask, "Do you ever think about that night?" He replied with just 3 words, "Only when it's quiet." I didn't respond because I knew exactly what he meant. I didn't even want to camp that high up. The weather was already turning in the valleys, and the higher elevations near Klingman's Dome were known for being unpredictable this time of year. Wet one minute, iced over the next. But Evan swore the view would be worth it. We'd been hiking through Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 3 days, sticking mostly to the ridge trails. That last afternoon, we followed a narrow offshoot trail that looped along a ridge near the Tennessee-North Carolina border not far from Klingman's. It wasn't marked on the official maps, but Evan had found it in some old trail notes online. We set up camp on a small outcrop that overlooked a hollow filled with bare trees. The kind of silence that clings to you like damp wool hung over everything. No birds, no bugs, just the low whisper of wind brushing over the pines. That's when we noticed the boulder. It was too perfect, rounded, smooth, and about the size of a compact car, half buried in the slope. Its surface shimmered slightly under the moonlight, slick with dew. But what really got us was the temperature. I touched it out of habit, thinking it might be wet. It was warm, not just not cold. Warm. Like a car hood that's been sitting in the sun all afternoon. Which made no sense. It was just shy of midnight and the air was cutting cold. My fingers tingled from the temperature difference. Evan pressed his hand to it too, then glanced at me. "You feel that?" he asked. I nodded. Neither of us had an explanation, so we just chalked it up to geothermal something or other and left it at that. We ate cold jerky and trail mix, talked quietly for a bit, then zipped into our sleeping bags. The fire had burned down to red embers. The fog was rolling in slow, thick and low, brushing the ground like it was searching for something. Around 1 a.m. I woke up to a noise, low, subtle, a kind of hum or pulse. It was coming from the direction of the boulder. I unzipped my bag just enough to lean out of the tent flap. The fog had thickened. I couldn't see far, but the rock was still there, still slightly glistening in the moonlight. Then it happened again. A vibration, soft but deep, like a distant engine idling underground. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then silence. I lay back down, told myself it was just settling stone or something natural, but I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a headlamp and stepped out of the tent. Evan was still zipped in, snoring lightly. The cold hit me hard, except near the rock. As I stepped close, the temperature shifted. I could feel it radiating off the surface like heated stone after summer sun. I leaned forward, placing a palm on it again. It was steady. Then I pressed my ear to it, and I swear to God, I heard something. A slow, rhythmic thump, 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 like a heartbeat buried deep inside the stone. I pulled back. My own heart was hammering now, like the sound had reached into me and matched pace. I backed away, told myself it was the wind, maybe a trick of echo. Maybe I'd been breathing too close and heard my own pulse through bone. I crawled back into the tent. Eventually, I must have drifted off. When I woke, the sky was pale and the fog had lifted a bit. My body was stiff from cold. I reached to unzip my sleeping bag and realized it was no longer inside the tent. I was halfway out. My sleeping bag had been dragged a full 2 feet toward the edge of the tent flap. My feet were sticking out into the frost. There were no signs of pulling, no claw marks or footprints. Just the impression of where I'd been and where I'd ended up. The boulder sat maybe 10 feet away, closer than I remembered. I didn't say anything to Evan when he woke up. He'd slept through the whole thing. He always did. Could sleep through a tornado. While I made coffee, I kept glancing toward the boulder, trying to judge if it had shifted. I know how that sounds. I kept telling myself it couldn't move. It was half buried in the ridge, solid as anything, but it felt closer. Or maybe I'd just been closer to it in the night than I thought. We packed up slowly, neither of us in a rush. I kept hoping Evan would mention the sound or say something about the warmth, but he didn't. In fact, he barely looked at the thing. Just before we left, I asked, "Did you hear anything weird last night?" He shrugged. "You mean the wind?" I nodded, even though that wasn't what I meant. The hike back down was quiet. My thoughts kept drifting to that pulsing sound, the dragging of the bag, the way the fog had crept up and receded like tidewater around that stone. But I didn't bring any of it up. When we got back to Asheville, I tried to forget it, threw myself into work, stopped hiking for a while. But the dreams started about a week later. Not nightmares exactly, just pressure, a sound I couldn't wake from. I'd be dreaming of walking through the woods, the crunch of frost underfoot, and then I'd hear it again, that slow, steady thump, like something breathing just below the surface of the trail, calling me back. One morning, I woke up with dirt under my fingernails. I hadn't left the apartment all weekend. I started keeping notes, times I woke up, phrases I'd half remember from sleep. One word kept coming up over and over, close, sometimes scrawled in my own handwriting. Once typed into my phone's notes app with no timestamp. Then, about a month after the trip, I went back. Alone. I told myself it was for closure, to prove it wasn't anything. Just a weird temperature pocket or an animal near the tent. The trail was harder to follow this time. Overgrown, less defined, like the ridge didn't want me back. I had to check my GPS 4 times just to find the clearing. But the boulder was still there, except it wasn't warm anymore. It was hot. I didn't touch it this time. Didn't lean in. Just stood a few feet away. The air around it shimmered like heat on asphalt, but the forest around us was 40 degrees and dropping. I turned and left without setting up camp. That night, back home, I found something on the back of my neck, a faint reddish outline, a ring, like the edge of something circular had been pressed into my skin. I couldn't explain that either. I haven't hiked since. I sold most of my gear, but I still think about that rock, especially when I feel the tremor, the low hum that starts somewhere in my chest when the night's too quiet. Like something old is calling from under the hills. Sometimes I wake up sweating, tangled in sheets, convinced I'm still in that sleeping bag, still being pulled, inch by inch, towards something warm in the dark. And every time, I check the floor by my bed because I don't remember climbing out. But the sheets are always halfway there. There's a section of the Appalachian Trail near the Tennessee-North Carolina border where the trees grow tight and the air never really dries. I won't say exactly where, but that's where it happened. It was late October. Me, Kyle, and Nate had hiked in from an old trailhead that barely shows up on digital maps anymore. Just a gravel turnoff and a rusted sign eaten through by moss. Nate's dad had told him about a primitive campsite up past a ridge with a view that made the extra miles worth it. Said it had been there since the 60s. Long abandoned, but flat, quiet, dry. The trail felt wrong almost immediately. Too quiet. Not in a peaceful way. In a waiting way. Everything smelled like mold and bark rot, the kind of cold where the ground stays soft no matter how dry the week's been. I remember thinking I'd never felt air that still. We reached the campsite late afternoon. Sure enough, there was a clearing, fire pit made of old stones, half-collapsed picnic table, and maybe 50 feet off the main site, tucked beneath leaning pine and chokecherry, was the old latrine hut. It looked worse than I expected. 4 wood walls, buckling roof, door hanging just slightly ajar. No windows. The kind of place that should have been knocked down years ago. Still usable, Kyle said, already laughing. That night we made a small fire, cooked up some ramen and jerky. The fog rolled in heavy and low. By 10 p.m. the flames barely lit beyond the rocks. Nate turned, in early. Kyle and I stayed up, passing a half-warm flask and telling dumb stories. Around 1 a.m. Kyle stood up. Got a piss. Might as well use the throne, he said, grabbing a headlamp. He disappeared into the fog with a crunch of leaves. I remember how loud that sound felt once he was gone, how fast the silence rushed back in. A few minutes passed, then more. I started to call out when I heard his boots fast and sloppy stumbling back through the trees. He burst into the firelight, pale and shaking. There's someone in there, he said, almost choking on it. In the hut. I stood, heart already up in my throat. Who? I don't know. He swallowed. Woman, crouched, hands over her face, whispering something. I thought she was hurt. Did you talk to her? He shook his head. I didn't even open the door all the way, just pushed it. She was there, facing the corner. Wouldn't look at me. We stared toward the trees. I didn't see anything. Nate unzipped his tent, groggy and annoyed. We told him. He didn't believe us. Probably some squatter, he said. It's remote, but not that. Remote. Could be someone camped nearby using it. But no one else had passed us on the trail. No boot tracks. No smoke on the horizon. Still, it was possible. We didn't sleep much. When the sun came up, we waited an extra hour before going to check the door was shut and chained. A rusted chain looped through 2 thick bolts on either side, crusted with time and locked tight with a padlock that looked 50 years old. The kind of rust that had eaten down into the iron. We hadn't noticed it hanging there the night before, but now it was obvious. There was no way that door had been opened in years. We stared at it for a long time. Then Kyle walked around to the back, found a loose board, and pried it up enough to shine his headlamp in. He said nothing for a while. Then, come look. Inside there was no sign of a person, just dirt, piles of it, and small bones. Animal, mostly. Squirrel, possum, some bigger. The walls were warped, mold climbing halfway up. The toilet hole had caved in, swallowed by years of erosion. But the door, on the inside of the door, carved into the wood in deep splinters, were claw marks, wide and violent, Some fresh-looking, like something had tried to get out. No footprints in or out, just the 3 sets we'd made. We didn't talk much on the hike back. The air felt even heavier than before, like it was watching us. The trees creaked differently. The trail didn't feel familiar even though we'd just come up it a day earlier. Kyle kept checking over his shoulder. He didn't say anything else about what he saw. Not that morning, not during the hike, not even in the car. Just stared out the window the whole ride home, chewing the inside of his cheek raw. A week passed, then 2. I tried to make sense of it. Told myself the woman was real. Maybe someone squatting out there, mentally unstable, retreating from the world. Maybe Kyle imagined her. Maybe the chain had always been there, and we missed it in the fog and the dark. Maybe. But the claw marks. The silence. The bones. I couldn't shake the image of that hut. How the air around it felt thick, like stepping underwater. About a month after the trip, I got a call from Kyle's sister. He'd been picked up wandering a few miles off Highway 143, barefoot, wearing just a t-shirt and shorts in freezing rain. No ID, no phone. He wasn't speaking. They checked him into a facility in Knoxville. I visited once. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't respond. Just sat by the window staring at the ground outside. Eventually I asked him, "What did she say? The woman in the hut?" He didn't move for a long time. I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, in a whisper so soft I had to lean forward to hear it, she said, "I remember who you are, that's all. I left not long after. I haven't gone back. Nate doesn't talk about the trip either. He moved out west, said the humidity messed with his lungs. But sometimes I dream about that trail, about the fog curling under my boots, about standing in front of that door again. I always wake up before I open it. Except once, in that dream, I push the door open, and it's not chained anymore. It swings inward slowly, revealing a figure crouched in the corner, and before I can turn away, she lifts her face. It's not a stranger's face. It's mine. Mouth open, whispering something I can't quite make out. I haven't camped since, and I don't think I ever will, because I still don't know what Kyle saw in that hut. But I think whatever it was, it recognized something in him, and maybe it saw it in me too. I've camped all across the Appalachians, from the Shenandoah down to the Smokies, but nothing ever sat with me like that trip near the Georgia line. It was supposed to be a farewell hike for Derek, who was moving out west for a forestry job. Just one last long weekend with the old crew, me, Derek, and Mateo. We hiked up from a gravel road outside Blue Ridge, Georgia, hauling packs and a cooler we probably shouldn't have brought. The trail wasn't marked anymore, but Derek had the route saved from some backcountry site. It led us to this bend in the river, a small shelf of land tucked between 2 low ridges. Quiet, flat, shaded. It felt untouched. No cell signal, no noise. Just the soft rush of water and the occasional bird call cutting through the thick, still air. It had rained the day before, so everything smelled like wet leaves and old bark. The ground was spongy. Mushrooms dotted the edge of the trees. We set up camp on the first day and built a fire ring out of stones near the river's edge. Standard stuff. Logs, dry pine needles, a bit of starter fluid Derek insisted on bringing. The fire burned bright and clean that night. We cooked over it, passed a flask around, and talked about everything but what we were really there for. Derek leaving. The second night, things already felt different. The fire gave off more smoke than before, and it smelled strange. Not wood smoke, but something metallic underneath, like copper or old blood. We chalked it up to damp logs. The morning after, everything was coated in dew. Our boots were soaked through. Mateo was boiling water for oatmeal, and I started breaking down the tent. I kicked some dirt onto the fire to snuff the last of the embers, but they didn't go out. Just sat there pulsing. Not orange like normal coals might, but this odd reddish blue, like flame under black glass. "Did you see that?" I asked Mateo, He nodded. Probably something in the sap, he said, but didn't sound convinced. We doused it twice with water. It hissed and steamed, but the glow didn't fade. Derek hauled over a jug of river water and dumped the whole thing. Still, it smoldered. That's when the man came down the trail. He wasn't dressed for a serious hike. Old jeans, beat-up canvas jacket, small faded pack. Looked like he hadn't shaved in weeks. He didn't say hello. Just slowed as he passed our camp and stared at the fire. "You shouldn't have built one there," he said. We looked at each other. Mateo asked, "Why not?" The man just pointed, off to the left, a few yards past the fire ring, at this moss-covered rock I hadn't paid attention to before. "It's marked," he said. I walked over to it. From a distance it looked like any other boulder, just moss and rainwear. But when I brushed the moss away, I saw them. Names, dozens of them. Some faded, some so fresh they looked carved yesterday. I crouched down, tracing the edge of one letter with my thumb. Then I saw another, then another. My name was there. Eli, carved deep into the stone, followed by my last name. No date, no initials, just my full name. Derek and Mateo came up behind me. Derek bent forward reading, then froze. "Mine's here too," he said. I didn't want to look anymore. Something about the rock felt wrong, like the names weren't a memorial, more like a ledger. We turned to ask the man what it meant. But he was already gone. The trail curved, but there was no sound of footsteps, just the whisper of wind through leaves. We packed in silence after that, but the fire still wouldn't die. We didn't talk much on the hike out. Derek led the way, fast-paced, eyes fixed straight ahead. Mateo followed, glancing behind him every few hundred feet. I brought up the rear. None of us looked back at the fire ring. I could still feel it, though, like heat crawling up the back of my neck even as the trail rose into cooler air. That glow was burned into my eyes. That soft blue-red like coals from something older than wood. The trail out took longer than we remembered. Trees looked different. The incline felt wrong. At one point, we hit a small stream we didn't recall crossing on the way in. We double-checked the map. It was right, but it felt wrong. When we finally reached the car, Mateo tossed his gear in the trunk and said nothing. Derek just stood by the edge of the lot, staring at the tree line. "You saw your name too," I said. He nodded. "And something else." I waited. He didn't finish. We left it at that. A few days after getting home, I got a message from Mateo. Just a photo. It was a section of his living room wall, drywall chipped open like something had scratched it. Inside the gouge, barely visible, were faint lines. Letters. His name. I didn't respond. That night I checked around my own place. At first, nothing. Then I opened the door to the crawl space beneath my porch, something I hadn't done in months. It was cold under there and smelled like wet stone. On the concrete wall just above the dirt, someone had scraped into the surface, Eli Jacob Marsh. Perfect handwriting. Too perfect. I backed out fast. Locked the door. I didn't sleep that night. A week later, I got a call. Derek was gone. Not missing. He'd quit his job before even starting it, given away half his stuff, and vanished. His sister said he left a short note that just said, "I shouldn't have built it." That was it. I haven't seen him since. Sometimes I think I hear the crackle of that fire when everything's quiet, when the TV is off and the pipes aren't ticking and the wind dies down. I'll be lying in bed and I swear I smell smoke. That same faint metallic scent, like burnt iron and river water. I've looked for explanations. Mineral deposits in the stone. Maybe the fire pit was near some sort of gas vent. But the names, there's no logic to that. They weren't scratched lightly. They were etched deep, weathered, as if they'd been there long before we arrived, and just kept updating themselves. A week ago, I went hiking on a short trail near my neighborhood. Nothing remote, just a loop through a local forest preserve. There was a rock near the trailhead. covered in lichen and moss. I stopped. I didn't want to. I just did. I brushed some of the moss back, just enough to see. More names. Not mine. Not yet. But some of them looked familiar. I think about that fire, the way it wouldn't die, the color of the embers, how they didn't glow like anything natural. I wonder if the fire wasn't the point. Maybe it was just the marker, a flag planted in something buried beneath. And I wonder if lighting it meant we agreed to something. The man on the trail tried to warn us, we just didn't know how to listen. Now I can't unsee my name carved in stone, and I'm scared one day I'll see it again. Not on a rock, but somewhere else. Fresh, clean, waiting.